On the 26th of May 2023, Nikon released the Z8. And after a year of ownership, I can easily say that this is the jack of and master of all trades. And in my opinion, this is the best camera currently available. I've had my Z8 for over a year now, and getting my hands on a Z8 2 months after release was not easy. I was in Tokyo at the time, and I actually had planned to buy the camera in Tokyo for tax reasons. It was much cheaper there. But I spent an entire day on the Yamanote line hitting up every camera shop from Ueno, Akihabara and Shinjuku until I got to the big camera in the Odaku building in Shinjuku, where there was one Z8 left to buy. So we got a Z8 and a 24-120 f4S. Your fucking old news D850. This is the new hotness. Old and busted, new hotness. Old and busted, new hotness. Now this was part of my 6-week trip across Asia, and during the trip in the Hong Kong and Taiwan portions I was using the D850 until I got the Z8, which of course retired the D850. Still a great camera for stills, the D850, absolutely amazing camera, but it isn't for video. It's a kind of pants for that. So the Z8 is a full frame 45 megapixel camera and has all the mod cons for a top of the line camera. IBIS, high frame rate shooting at 20 FPS RAW, dual card slots, sort of, AI subject detection, fast and accurate autofocus, face and eye detection, and a million different autofocus modes, of course, 380,000 autofocus points, and a bunch of other specs that really don't actually matter when you're shooting 99.9% of the time. Because all the specs in the world won't make your pictures better, but better specs will lift some technical limitations, but the bar for those limits nowadays is so goddamn high. You really have to be pushing the limits of what cameras are just technically capable of to justify buying something like this. Which is why I didn't justify it. I just bought one because I wanted it. So for stills, the camera is a true jack of all trades. It can do anything. Landscape, wildlife, portrait, sports, anything you want, because this has the resolution and the speed, which is important. In the past, due to technical limitations, you had to choose between resolution or speed. You could have a high-res camera for landscapes, but it would be slow as dirt. Or you could have a lightning fast camera, which would have a lower resolution, but the camera will be able to handle the data rate and keep up with fast moving objects in sports and high frame rate shooting. Even in 2016, you still had to choose between these limits. The Nikon D5, for example, had a 21 megapixel sensor that could do 12 FPS, or you could buy the D810 with 36 megapixels for landscapes. But the camera was very slow, only held 23 frames in the buffer at 5 FPS, and it took 10 seconds to clear to cards. It was a slow camera, but it made those detailed landscape images. So it's always been a trade-off. Do you want resolution or do you want speed? But it's also kind of hard to think that in 6 years from the release of the D5 with those limitations, we went to the Z9 and then to the Z8, where those limitations have fallen away, which can do it all. It can track subject and blast out frames in sports, head out for a spot of birding, and then to the top of a mountain for a landscape shot. And all the while being able to use that high resolution image to crop the bollocks out of all 3 shots. There's no tech limits now, just your budget, your time, and your skill. And it's kind of funny that even in other systems, these limits can kind of still exist. Sony actually does this with the A7R, 9 and 7S for resolution, speed, and video, while Nikon just put all the tech into one camera. And when we get to video, we'll get to there, believe that. Sony fans, if you're tempted, you can have it all in one camera if you want. It's just a shame that the tech specs in the world won't make you or me a better photographer though. To test this jack of all trades theory for myself, I brought the Z8 over the last year to multiple places like Japan for landscapes and cityscape shots. Fuck me, this water is cold. My feet are going numb and I'm sitting in 36-degree heat. the Japanese countryside. It's lovely out here in the evening. And to Kenya for a safari to do some wildlife shooting. And even photographing an airshow is a breeze with the Z8. And I even have done some very basic astro in my parents' backyard. Been a good dog. So let's talk about the Z8's party piece. It has no mechanical shutter. It relies entirely on an electronic shutter. Now the issue with normal electronic shutters is the rolling shutter effect, where different parts of the image are read at different times, and this produces very odd results. The classic way to show this is a golf swing, where the club decides to bend it like Beckham as the different parts of the image are read. So in order to make an electronic shutter work, the Z8 uses a ridiculously fast stacked sensor, which is itself a fascinating concept. I really should probably make a video on different types of camera sensors and shutters. But for now, all you need to know is that this reads fast enough to remove that rolling shutter issue and allow for a fully electronic shutter. And to demonstrate its gotta go fast ability, we need a very fast moving object, like a helicopter rotor at an airshow. And you can see that the propellers in the pictures and video are straight and even without any weird rolling shutter effects. And that is something that is truly special with this camera, is the fact that it has the ability to take a picture like that on the electronic shutter completely silently without artifacts. Now apparently there are some banding issues potentially in some scenarios, in some speed lights and some setups, although these apparently have been fixed in firmware in the camera, and I think the flashes can handle it differently as well with different firmware. But personally, I haven't ran into any issues using any of my flashes with this. They've all worked perfectly. If you buy a Z8, however, you might see the fact that there is actually what looks like a mechanical shutter. And you might be thinking to yourself, this camera is full of lies. It's supposed to be an electronic shutter camera only. This is actually just a sensor shield to cover the sensor when the camera is off for changing lenses in a dusty environment like, I don't know, Africa, for example. And I have to say, this cover works really well. I haven't got a single speck of dust on the sensor yet, unlike when I had the A7 III, where it got dusty every goddamn day, particularly in Vietnam. It was such a pain in the ass to deal with. I actually had to carry around blowers and like cleaning swabs with me to keep the dust off the sensor. It was a pain in the tits. This is a much better solution. Also, the sensor cover is actually quite tough. You can actually like poke it a little bit. I wouldn't advise doing this, I'm just tapping it very gently. But that won't affect its operation because it is designed to be a sensor protector. And this is an issue with some cameras where they actually use the shutter as the sensor protector, and the shutter can be quite delicate. So if you have that on and you change your lens and you accidentally jam the lens in at an angle or something, or the camera lurches, or maybe you're changing it while you're being driven around somewhere and it bumps and goes in, it could damage the shutter. With this, it would only damage the sensor protector and it wouldn't actually cause any issues. Well, it would be an issue if the sensor protector won't open, but you're not going to destroy the sensor, and it's probably a lot cheaper to replace this than it is a shutter. Or maybe I'm just talking completely out my ass, you never know. As for like using the EVF on the Z8, it's really nice, it's fast, it has no blackout at all, it has a nice high frame rate, super nice to use. I do wish it was a little bit higher res, and also there's the simple fact that this is an EVF, it's not going to be as nice to look through as a DSLR with an OVF. But it does have the advantages of an EVF, like exposure preview and all that, but it's not optical. But you can't have it both ways, so it is what it is. So essentially for stills, this is the everything camera. It can handle it all. But what about video? So for video, the Z8 handles it all as well. This can do up to 8.3K 60p raw video full frame. And yes, that is 8K raw video. Internal, which makes this one of the best video cameras on the planet. It's not just 8.3K raw, it can actually do like 4.1K 120p raw, and having, raw high frame rate footage like that to work with is insanely good. But it's not all raw video, of course. It also does high bit rate, H.265 up to 8K 30 and 4K 120, and that's all in 10-bit N-Log full frame. But there's also the option to use 8-bit H.264 if you want, and there's DX crop modes for each shooting mode as well. So basically, if you want to shoot video, this can do it perfectly. It's probably the ultimate spec mirrorless camera for video. There's nothing really it can't do. Before I actually owned this camera, I had never shot raw video before. But, oh my God, working with raw video is amazing. I shot a lot of 8.3K raw in Kenya, and whew, the detail, oh my God. And the fact that I could crop in, I think 2.1 times and still have a perfect 4K image is just insane to me. Like, that's wild. And it's in RAW, so you can like fiddle with ISO and exposure and settings after the fact to a certain extent and just get the video perfect. The only issue is that 8K RAW video eats memory cards alive, you know. 1 terabyte card, just, that was delicious. Gonna need 20 more of those when you have them. Now, a lot of formats like the Nikon RAW video can only be recorded to the CF Express card because of the high bitrate. And that bitrate is insane because my 1 terabyte card, which was not cheap by the way, will be filled with 40 minutes of 8K 60 RAW in the normal quality. Not even the high quality, in the normal quality. So if you want to travel and shoot a lot of raw video, you need to pack a stack of SSDs and fast card readers because you're gonna need them. Also, when you're shooting video, the Z8 has waveforms, so you can actually expose the video properly using the screen. But I would get an external monitor if you can. It does make it a lot easier to get this right. But having waveforms in camera is super useful for when shooting video. As amazing as the stills and video specs are, it's kind of not worth shit if the autofocus is pants. And luckily, the Z8 autofocus is excellent. Honestly, talking about autofocus is kind of pointless because it's nowadays basically perfect. It's controlling the autofocus properly that's the issue. So if the autofocus is like selecting the wrong subject or jumping to a face in the background, you know, doing weird stuff like that, that is what gets you. And to control that, you have to come in slow and watch your doors and corners. You know, you got to come into the room slow or the room eats you. Wait, what? So the Z8 handles autofocus beautifully. I actually prefer using the 3D tracking method most of the time. All I need to do is just select the subject with the box. It locks on and tracks that subject, and then if it can see a face and eye, it will actually automatically switch between those and track those instead, and then back to the subject when it can't. It just works. And because of that, I use this mode almost exclusively. For landscapes and tripod shots, I do actually use manual focus and the magnifier on the screen to absolutely nails focus, as it's better for that. But for moving subjects, 3D tracking is what I use because it's just easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The only time I've had issues was when I was trying to track Luna, the German Shepherd puppy, while she was running around the yard with the zoomies. And that was because I was struggling to keep her in frame, so skill issue. Now, one thing that's really important on a camera, and it basically would make all the specs in the world worthless, is the controls. Because if you can't easily use the abilities in this camera, this is what drove me from Sony in the end because it was too frustrated to use the blasted cameras, you have to have good controls on your camera. And with Nikon, they have an excellent control system. In fact, they use the same control system for all of their cameras. And it means that I can operate this camera completely without ever needing to go into the menu. I might have to use the menu on this camera once a week to change some really obscure setting, but once I've got it set up, I never need to touch anything in here. And even when I'm traveling and once I set the time zone on the camera on arrival, I just don't go into the menus. Because Nikon's controls are so good, I don't have to. So the basic way all Nikon cameras work to change a setting quickly is you hold the button and then you turn the rear dial for the main setting and the front dial for the sub setting. So for ISO, for example, you would hold the ISO button down and then you change the rear dial to change the ISO of the camera, and then the front dial actually toggles the auto ISO option on and off, which is just so handy. Or for autofocus modes, I just hold down the right button, then the rear dial controls what type of autofocus mode. For example, if it's a single or continuous focus, and then the front dial sets the subsetting like 3D tracking, point autofocus, or general area autofocus. And I really do love how simple this is to change these settings. It just works. And it even works in the I menu. So if you press the I menu, you can just change your settings directly on the screen using that as well, sub setting and main setting. It's so useful. Now also on this camera there are the shooting banks, which I actually really love, mostly. So the shooting banks are kind of like the last used settings for each bank. You don't save them like presets or custom modes. They're kind of auto-saved every time you change a setting, like your exposure. Now the only issue I have with these shooting banks is the fact that you can't separate them for photo and video. And I find that super annoying as I use very different settings in video mode and in photo mode. But if I decide to, if I'm on the A bank and then I change over to video mode and change all the settings, when I go back to stills mode, the settings are all changed for stills mode as well. It's super annoying, and I really do wish Nikon would add an option to separate the photo and video banks for me. The way I'm getting around that for now is I only have one bank for photo, which is the A bank, and then the B, C, and D are all set up for different types of video, like slow motion or 8K or RAW. And I found that that is just enough to get away with shooting this and not needing to adjust settings too much. But Nikon, please allow me to separate those banks for photo and video and add an option to the menu to enable that, because it'd be so useful. Or if that option already exists in there and I'm an idiot, please tell me. I would love to know. Also, the Z8, like all mirrorless cameras and all cameras should have, is a proper video still selector switch with separate I menus and button mappings for each mode, except shooting banks, which is super handy. Other manufacturers take note. This is how you control a hybrid camera for photo and video. So I do think Nikon's controls are actually amazing. I can pick up any Nikon and just use it and control it easily, from the mirrorless cameras to the DSLRs and even the F5, which uses the same control ideas, just with a lot less settings. As for build quality, no issues here. The Z8 is a tough camera. I've actually dropped it 3 days after getting it onto concrete from waist height near the snow monkeys in Nagano. What happened was it yeeted itself off of the quick release plate on my shoulder bag, landing lens first straight down onto the lens hood, which did save the lens, thank God. But the camera landed quite hard on the right hand side, and it's actually got a good scuff here from landing on the concrete. But the Z8 just shrugged that off. Also, it has handled everything I've thrown at it. You know, even in Africa, where it got bopped off the seats in the van going around multiple times a day. It got covered in dust a few times and there was no issues at all. Not even a speck of dust got on the sensor, thanks to that sensor shield. I've also used the camera a good bit in the rain, and I mean like just going around using it normally in a rain shower, and it never missed a beat. It also has never overheated on me once. Even in the sweltering Japanese summer recording 8K video, the camera just did it and handled it perfectly. There was no overheating, no issues with rain or dust or anything like that. It is a tough, reliable camera so far anyway. Now, I've sung the praises of this camera for God knows how long now, but there are some issues. So I mentioned the shooting bank issue for photos and videos already. Nikon, please give me that setting in the menu to have separate banks. Also, the battery on this camera is kind of small. It uses the EN-EL15 batteries that Nikon has been using for years and years and years. And that means if you end up with older batteries and shooting high-end video, it's going to chew through batteries pretty quick. It's not a major issue, but going through 2 batteries a day when I'm traveling would be pretty normal for me. And I'm not using the camera like super heavily during that time. I'm sure during a big event or something, you'd probably burn through 3 or 4 batteries pretty quick. Also, when it comes to batteries, you can actually recharge the batteries in camera, which is really nice if you need to top it up while traveling. Nikon has a power delivery USB-C port on the camera directly, and that allows you to use standard power delivery chargers. So you can use the high power chargers for your phone and laptop, plug it in here and it'll charge the camera up super quick, which is really nice. That's a nice standardized charger to deliver fast charging. You don't need to have, fancy complicated chargers or some unique thing. It's just USB-C charging and away you go. Also, I kind of wish the camera had a flippy screen. Now, I bought the camera knowing that it didn't, but that's on me. But I do wish the camera screen would flip out. This multi-axis screen is actually quite good and is excellent unless you want to film yourself. So if you don't want to do that, it has a perfect screen. One thing I would love to see on the next version is the option for dual CF Express card slots, as this only has one CF Express slot and one SD card slot. Now, this is not an issue for stills. unless you're ripping at 20 FPS. But it is an issue for video because you can't record some videos to both slots. It's a little annoying, so if you're doing really high-end video with this, you're limited to only shooting to the CF Express card, and then if that fails, well, one way around this problem, and something I'd love to see in future cameras, is an external storage option that uses a standard PCIe port like Oculink. And it wouldn't actually be that hard because CF Express uses the PCIe NVMe interface already. So maybe you'd have like, you know, an Oculink port here, and then you'd have like an adapter that would plug onto the bottom of the camera and have a wire running out. You could run that to a U.2 SSD and have a massive storage system kind of all built in. That would be super cool to have external drive support like that. Or another way you could do this is to use USB 4, which can do PCIe tunneling, and then have the drives hooked up that way. There's a couple of ways you could do it, but having an option to record to external media that's not the cards would be super useful. And lastly, the Z8 is honestly kind of a chunker for a mirrorless camera. Like, it's basically the same size as the D850, which is a pretty big, heavy DSLR, so carrying around the Z8 for a day can be a bit of a pain in the lower back. So as you might have guessed, I really like the Z8, and it is my master camera for all situations. And over the last year, it has not let me down one time, and I don't see it letting me down at all for years and years to come. And that is why I think the Z8 is the jack of and master of all trades. See you next time. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's the Yahoos are out there letting off fireworks nearby, and I'm just going to deal with it because I'm not waiting. I need to get this filmed. Man doesn't put on his indicator while driving in a quiet road. Did it really happen?